Well, good morning. For our reading this morning, I want to draw your attention to the book of Hebrews, and I want to read to you the first 4 verses. And the author says this: "Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our forefathers by the prophets. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir over all things, through whom he also created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God, and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become so much superior to the angels, as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs." God, in his abundant grace and mercy, down through the corridors of time, has privileged our forefathers with our Old Testament forefathers, with glimpses of revelations regarding himself and his eternal purpose. He spoke through the patriarchs, angels, prophets, and so on, in many and various ways and at different times. And these Old Testament saints were having glimpses of their God, his person, and his purpose. Oh, how privileged they were. But you know what? A day came in history when God sent a final, superior, better, and clearer revelation of himself. How did God send this revelation? Well, listen to Paul in Galatians 4:4. He says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son." And the author of Hebrews reminds us, "But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son." Or in a more accurate translation would be, he spoke to us in a Son. All that God desires to communicate and reveal to man concerning himself and his eternal purpose, he has communicated to us in Jesus Christ. In Jesus, God has said it all. Very often people say, "Oh, I wish there was a word from God." But listen, God has spoken. God has given us his final revelation in Jesus Christ. And the author of Hebrews continues on this superior channel of revelation by stating him to be the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. My friend, this morning, if you want to know what God is like, well, look to Jesus. "Anyone who has seen me," said Jesus, "has seen the Father." If you want to know what God has to say, well, look to, or listen rather, to Jesus, because the Father spoke from heaven and declared on more than one occasion, "This is my Son whom I love, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." If you want to know what God has to say about Christian living, listen to Jesus. Read the Sermon on the Mount. If you want to know what God has to say on love, look to the life of Jesus. If you want to know what God has to say on grace, look to the life of Jesus. If you know what God has to say on acceptance, look to the life of Jesus. If you want to know what God has to say on mercy, look to Jesus. If you want to know what God has to say about sacrifice, look to Jesus. You see, Jesus is the final and superior revelation of God. You see, the revelation in the Old Testament was fragmentary. It was occasional. It was progressive, spoken through channels of sinful, fallible, and mortal men and women. But the revelation in the Son is complete, is permanent, is final, spoken through one infallible, impregnable person, and he being the sinless and eternal Son of God. In these last days, today, my friend, God speaks to you and me through Jesus Christ, his Son. And so I pray this morning, Lord, speak to me, that I might speak in living echoes of thy tone. As thou hast sought, so let me seek thy erring children, lost and lone. Amen. God bless you.